Are there any other major warning
Yeah.
signs, behold, disaster imminent that you see?
Yeah. So yeah. Gottman Institute, which is founded by John Gottman,
Hmm.
and he's like this relationship expert that marriage and family therapists, we totally just look up to him and refer to him. All right, so he's been studying relationships in what's called a love lab, where he focuses on the relationships that work and what makes them work, right?
Hmm.
And so he has what's called the four horsemen of relationship, these four things that destroy relationships, right? So
Okay.
you have criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Okay, contempt, that's the one that I look out for, like, because
Hmm.
that destroys 99% of relationships. And it's basically this sense of enmity. Like when sometimes couples have this, they assume negative intention from each other,
Hmm.
right? When that's there, I actually stop the session and I'll psychoeducate them about what I just said. I'll just say, look, you can't do couples therapy until you're a couple. That's what I typically say to them. And I say basically, enemies don't communicate. They can come to a truce or have a peace treaty, but they don't communicate. Like if you don't have any motivation to effectively communicate or resolve conflict with an enemy.
Hmm.
So if I see enmity, like this assumption, and sometimes people think they can come to therapy, James Michael, and just kind of
Hmm.
fight in front of me, and they will. Like they will just fight, and they'll
Yeah.
forget that I'm there, and I have to just like. That's the third blaring red flag is if there's this assumption of enmity, I have to stop everything
Uh-huh.
and say, okay, before we do anything, we have to remove that assumption.
Yeah. Man, that just sets off all kinds of resonances in my head of the creation account, where the serpent comes and puts strife between the man and the woman, and immediately there's blame, the man blaming the woman, and then part of the curse, God says, to the serpent, when he's cursing the serpent, I'm going to put enmity between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, you will strike his heel. So the enmity that we are supposed to have should be
Mhm.
towards the evil one. But
Absolutely.
what happens is the enmity turns, your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. There's
Yes.
that, it splits up the team. And
Yes.
did you ever see, this may be a complete tangent, but I don't know if I've ever asked you, have you ever seen the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Brad
I
Pitt and
haven't.
Angelina Jolie? Okay. I watch it sometime. I want to get your thoughts because to me, that movie is one of the best parables for marriage. I mean, it's like 20 years old, so I'm not going to spoil anything, but
Yeah.
it's basically, it's a couple and they are both secret agents for competing organizations and they don't know it. And they
Mm.
end up together and I guess they like get hired to kill the other by the hire. It's this whole thing. So it's kind of a comedy, but kind of an action, but kind of a romance. And through the story, they start, their marriage is dull. I mean, it's like just the awful marriage. And
Yeah.
then they fight and they literally try to kill each other, like with guns and fighting and everything. It's a very cool scene. And then after the fighting, through the genuine fighting, then they reconnect, like they reignite what brought them together in the first place. And then for the rest of the movie, it's them against the world. And it's such a cool, I'm not a therapist. I don't know squat about it. Pastoral counseling is the class I did the worst in seminary, but I always thought that is a brilliant metaphor for what a marriage should be when it's in trouble, is you refocus and you realize who the real enemy is and is no longer each other. And then you turn and there's this, we got to talk more off camera because there's a great scene at the end. And you talked about it being a dance, and there's this scene where they're fighting and it's like a dance and all these assassins are coming at them. It's crazy. I mean, it's a crazy
Yeah.
movie. But
Yeah.
every time I watched it, I'm like, that is what I want in a marriage one day. They're fighting
Yes.
against each other. There's a scene where literally they are like shooting and he's shooting this way and she's shooting that way. And they're dancing, but while they're dancing,
Yes.
they're shooting the bat. It's such a beautiful image of what a marriage should be. If you get past that, who's the real enemy?
Have you read C.S. Lewis's description of what fairy tales actually were meant to be?
I've read him talking about it, but I don't know the specific one you're referring to off
Okay.
the top of my
So
head.
he basically says in the original fairy tales, the prince and princess get together
Mm-hmm.
and then they're separated. So like they're like separated in these woods. They lose each other. And so he has to like defeat this dragon. She has to defeat this sorceress, right? Then they end up finding each other at the end, and then they live happily ever after, right? So like the whole idea is it's like they have to overcome like their real enemies, right? So in the same way that you're talking about, the two things I give couples are I give them basically two mantras. So the first mantra is, if it's important to you, it's important to me because it's important to you. Like just that be the assumption of the relationship. It doesn't matter what it is, right? The second mantra is, it's you and me against the world, never against each other, right?
Right.
So when you do therapy for depression or anxiety, there's an intervention called externalization, where people externalize the anxiety. Instead of saying I am anxious or I am depressed, you it's like the depression is this thing that's coming at you, right? Well, I get couples to do that with their problems. Like there's this thing trying to interfere with our connection, and how can we stop this thing from doing that? And like you said, once that's the mindset, couples therapy is actually really easy and really quick. If you don't have enmity there, usually you just have to give a few communication techniques or conflict resolution techniques, and they're fine. Like you don't have to take a very long time to do that, unless you're with an anxious and avoidant, unless they have no idea why they're together, right? Or unless you have enmity. Like when I have that enmity there, sometimes it takes a really long time to get them to even realize, okay, you are assuming negative intention. Like everything you say assumes this person is actually trying to hurt you, right? And then they get in the amygdala, and it gets crazy, because I tell them, you're not supposed to be in the amygdala.
What is that?
You're trying.
What's the amygdala for those who don't know?
All right. So what I typically talk to couples about in conflict resolution is that the prefrontal cortex is a part of your brain where you're thinking rationally and you can make decisions and everything's fine. Okay. So when you shift from there to the amygdala, you're in fight or flight. Okay. And that's when people argue, that's when you say the meanest, cruelest, most evil things you can possibly say, because you're in attack mode. And the problem is, when that happens, when you get out of it, most people don't even remember what they said. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Unless you're somebody that's sensitive to words, right? Like, and usually that's what happens. You have somebody that's really sensitive to words. This person said the cruelest, most evil things they can say. Then afterwards, it's like, I'm sorry for everything I said. The other person's like, no, you said like 20 very specific evil things that you need to go through. Right.
Right.
And they don't remember it. Right. Because they're literally out of their mind. So what I get every couple to agree to are 20-minute timeouts. You can take up to 3. So when they feel themselves moving into that, their heart starts beating, or they know they're getting triggered, separate for 20 minutes, because it takes about that long to shift back here, right? So when they come back together, they can say, hey, are you ready to talk? And if they still don't feel ready, they can do another 20 minutes. They can do up to 3. They typically don't need more than an hour. But the reason that's important is because typically in relationships, you have somebody that wants to talk about it right now, and you have somebody that wants space. Yeah. And they kind of get on each other's nerves, right? So it gives both of them what they need. The person that needs space know they're going to get at least 20 minutes for space. The person that wants to talk know they're not going to have to wait any longer than 20 minutes to an hour. But it's so that you can shift from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. It is useless. I cannot stress enough. It is absolutely useless to try to have a discussion when you're in the amygdala. Useless. Don't even try.
Nothing will process. Everything will be weaponized and turned back against you.
That's when you get into the hellish, you get into those arguments that it's like, it feels like you're in the Twilight Zone. It's like, what in the world? Like, it's like, that's when you're in the amygdala, because you're in this state. And I think when Paul talks about giving the devil an opportunity, that's what he means. Like sinful anger, because he's the adversary. So he thrives on that. Right. Yeah. So you give an opportunity because you're in a part of the brain that you only need to be in when somebody's coming into your house and you need to do self-defense. It's for that. Right. So that's the time when you need to react, so that your reaction will, stop an assailant. But you never need to be like that with your wife or your husband. Right. But that's the mindset couples are in. They're in the same mindset that you're in when you have to fight someone.
Man, that's so good. And that's something that viewers can take away when they're having conflicts. I've been fortunate that I haven't had very many relationships where we've had like real angry arguments. I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times, but when that happened, I remember just feeling like, who is this person? Because this is not the person that I know. Why are they saying these things? And where's this coming from? And as a biblical person, I just, this is providing room for Satan. This is giving a foothold to the enemy.
Yes.
And so I would always try to bring it back. But the idea of that's a really good tip, taking a 20-minute break, or if needed longer. Because I know for some people, you want to, let's get it done. It's a problem. Let's address it and we can move on. And not everybody is wired that way.
The key is what you do during the 20 minutes also, because if you don't use the 20 minutes wisely, you're just going to come back more angry than when you left. So what I usually give them is when you're in the 20 minutes, I try to give people things that are really simple, because again, it's like when you teach self-defense, like you're trying to get, you have to have kind of like a muscle memory. You can't be trying to think about a whole lot of techniques, right? So it's the same thing. Like basically it's like when you go in the 20 minutes, what I say is, remember the principle I gave earlier. If it's important to you, it's important to me because it's important to you. So when you go take those 20 minutes, you can think, okay, what is important to me right now? And then you can think what's important to the other person. And so when you come out, that's the first thing out of your mouth. Okay, you know what? It's really important to me that we spend time together. The other person is like, yeah, it's just important to me that you understand that I'm tired. But notice, there's no enmity in that. Like you typically, when you state what's important to you, the other person is going to agree. Like there's no enmity in that, because one, there's already the agreement that if it's important to you, it's important to me. But two, it's an inherently peacemaking conversation, inherently peacemaking. And every couple I've talked to, one couple say, well, what if what's important to me is not important to me? Or what if I actually don't think that's important?
Right.
I was like, if you get to the essence of what's important, you probably will. Like most of the time, it's not going to be like that, So even if you have now, though, if there's such diverging values that's the case, then now you got to remember it. How can two walk together unless they agree?
Right.
So if you have this fundamental disagreement about what's important, okay, well, that's a red flag. That goes back to red flag number one, right? So I just wanted to throw that in, because what you do during the 20 minutes is important.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's really good. And I hope viewers are taking notes, because I can see all of this stuff. I mean, yes, applying in marriage, like when the relationship has already started, but before getting into a relationship, finding out what is important to this person, having those type of conversations before deciding, okay, this is the person I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket and we're going to try to make this thing work. And that's really good too, because you're not talking about, if I hear you right, you're not saying, oh, your wife likes watching HGTV, so that means you've got to watch HGTV with her and talk about flower beds. It's nothing like that. It's, you got to find out why does she like HGTV? What is it about that she likes? And then how can I find ways to, value that in her? Even if I don't have to sit and watch that show with her.
You just said it perfectly. Like, you're not going to typically disagree with that. Like if you find out, okay, if she likes to watch, real life housewives or whatever. Right. Right. And that just seems like the most shallow thing possible. I mean,
that's an immediate red flag to me. I'm out.
You just can't see any. So you can find out, okay, why do you like to watch this show?
Right.
Most of the time it's going to be, I'm just, because I actually had a couple like that. It's like, I really just like the travel and the, to me, there is a sense in which there are interesting relationship dynamics that happen. Okay? Right. You can agree to that, right? You can agree to that. Now, you still might not agree with the show, right? But you can at least agree to why she likes the show. You see what I'm saying? And same thing with this fishing show that this guy's watching. Like, how can you sit and watch people fish?
Yeah. I'm out for that too, by the way. If I meet a girl that likes fishing shows, we're just not going to work. No, but what you're saying is really helpful, because you can find, like, I can find something. Let's take the Kardashians, for example. I loathe everything about the brand that the Kardashians emulate, like everything about, I'm not talking about their individual personalities or anything. I don't know them, but that whole thing, that whole entity that I think is one of the powers and principalities of this world and is legitimately evil because of how vapid it is. If I know somebody who's like, I love that show, I love watching it, I would be like, okay, I'm never going to appreciate that ever. But what do you find interesting? Okay, let's talk about that. And now I could find myself sitting and being like, as long as you're okay with me hating this, I can sit here and watch it with you if we're having a discussion about these things that you're picking up on.
Absolutely.
You know, I just love the
Absolutely.
sister dynamic and I love how they're for family and this and that. Okay, let's talk about it. Let's unpack it. You can have a critical, in other words, you would view it like a critic, like a movie critic or an art critic, where you don't have to like it. You can unpack it and it can still be meaningful and the other person can like it. But you're both getting what you want from it. I'm getting the fact that this is not just mindless garbage that's being pumped into somebody's brain. They're getting the fact that they're enjoying the junk food nature of it, but also kind of reflecting. They're, self-reflective. And you could do that with anything. You do that with, somebody likes watching UFC, MMA, and somebody else is like, ugh, no, I hate this. You could actually talk about, okay, why? Tell me, bring me into your world a little bit. Even if I don't want to, even if I leave when we're done, I step out of that world, I'll be in it for a minute and I will try to understand. That is trying to understand the person seems to be a huge component in a successful relationship, like making an effort to try to understand them.
Man, you just said it. So one of the key communication tools I teach is open-ended questions and reflections. And I usually have to give a definition of effective communication. So I say effective communication is when the message sent is the message received and the goal is achieved. Message sent, message received, goal achieved. And then I have them to repeat that back. And then they repeat it back. And that's okay. We just communicated. Feedback. You and I just did it. And so what I get them to do is to think, okay, when you're talking to each other, instead of, again, enmity, instead of just kind of waiting for the other person to get done so you can talk, right? You're really just trying to get into them. Right. And that's, we come out of the womb screaming. We don't come out listening. So listening is something you have to practice doing.
That's good. Yeah.
You have to.